Michael Knowles is a conservative commentator, and he recently made a video in which he talked about vegans. So I'm going to react to that. Let's check it out.
Few things make me happier than chomping down on some dead, juicy, delicious animals. And this, unfortunately, creates a conflict between me and the vegan activists. So my producers have gathered together the strongest arguments made by the vegans on TikTok, and we will see if those arguments persuade me to give up my beloved meat.
You're probably not going to find very many good arguments for veganism on TikTok. I don't really know. I don't use that social media platform. But if you're going to listen to what the average vegan thinks about the subject, then you're probably not going to get the best arguments, right? That's just my initial impression. If you want to have a good debate about this topic, you should talk to Peter Singer.
I haven't really heard a good argument to be vegan at all. Just all these ways in which people fall short. Because yes, we're animals. We're just a different kind of animal. Human beings are animals, but we're a rational animal. We have a rational soul. We have will and intellect. We don't just follow our appetitive will. We don't just follow our base will. We don't just follow our desires for food or whatever, but we also follow our higher will and our concept of justice. The beasts.
Traditionally, philosophers consider human beings to be the rational animal, right? So we're part of the animal kingdom, we're mammals, but we have these higher capacities that differentiate us from the other animals. So we have theoretical rationality, which allows us to attain truth, that allows us to do like math and philosophy. We have practical rationality that allows us to attain our ends very efficiently. So the ability that allows us to play chess, that would be practical rationality. And those capacities distinguish us from the rest of the animal kingdom. Now, I'm not entirely sure where he's going with this yet, but it might be that he thinks that these capacities makes it such that we're somehow justified in eating other animals. I'm not sure.
He hates animals. Human rights are animal rights because humans are animals. If you fight for human rights and you don't fight for animal rights, you're being a speciesist. And that's just the fact of the matter.
Very cool, speciesist.
Caring towards animals is a good trait to have in a human, you know?
She makes one point that's true, which is that we shouldn't be cruel to animals.
What are you doing?
That's bad when we're cruel to animals. But the reason it's bad when we're cruel to animals is not because animals have any rights. If you're for human rights, but you're not for animal rights, you're a speciesist. What is a speciesist? I guess a speciesist is someone who draws distinctions between different species, which is true. Guilty as charged. You got me.
Okay, so a couple of things there. So first, I would agree that we should not be cruel to animals. And I think a strong argument for something like a vegan diet comes from that value, right? Factory farms are cruel to animals, and we shouldn't support institutions that are cruel to animals, right? So far, nobody has made that argument, and I'm not really sure why, but I think that's one of the strongest arguments for it. Now, notice that this argument doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot ever eat meat, right? That argument doesn't say that it is intrinsically wrong to eat meat. So for instance, let's say you accidentally hit a deer, right? And you kill the deer. I think it's okay to eat that deer. The other thing that it mentioned was speciesism. So speciesism is discrimination based on species membership. That is unjustified, right? So that's how it's paralleled with racism and sexism. It's discrimination, it's unjustified discrimination, okay? If you think that there is just discrimination between humans and animals such that we are justified to eat the other animals, then you have to give an argument as to why. Now, he said earlier that we have higher capacities, which is what philosophers have traditionally thought as well. If you want to base it off of that, then you would have to give an argument why those are the relevant capacities. So the argument that Peter Singer makes is that we shouldn't support these institutions that are cruel to animals, okay? And the reason why that matters is because animals can suffer. So it's not about the capacity to be rational, right? It's not the capacity to have theoretical or practical rationality that makes a being have some sort of moral worth, right? It's the fact that they can suffer, the fact that they can feel pain.
Of all the isms and the phobias I've been accused of, that one takes the cake. I am a speciesist. I don't want to be cruel to animals, but only because that would dull my humanity, only because that would turn me into a psycho.
So that is an argument that Kant makes, right? So Kant doesn't think that it's intrinsically wrong to, for instance, torture an animal. He says that we shouldn't torture animals because that would make us more likely to harm other human beings. So for Kant, animals don't have any intrinsic worth.
And in a way, probably create in me or stoke in me an appetite for suffering, a delight in. That's what like little kids who torture animals, they turn into serial killers. So that's why you do it. But it's not because the animal has a rational soul or any rights or anything like that.
Okay, so now he's referencing, this rational soul. Animals don't necessarily need to have any rights for them to factor into our moral considerations, right? They can have some moral worth. The fact that they can suffer, I think a lot of people would say, should matter.
The idea of 10,000 pigs just being slaughtered and turned into bacon every day.
Bacon is good for me.
Salivating just thinking about it.
All right, so here's some final thoughts. The first is that fighting against animal cruelty does not necessarily mean that eating meat is intrinsically wrong. Okay, I think they're easily tied together because the way that we get most of our meat is from factory farms. If we were to stop supporting factory farms, it would mean that we would drastically reduce our meat consumption. I think a lot of people would just end up being vegetarian because they wouldn't want to pay for the more expensive, humane meat, and they wouldn't want to hunt themselves, right? So I think in practicality, what it would lead to is just a drastic reduction of our meat. But that doesn't necessarily mean that eating meat itself is wrong, okay? Second, you can believe that animals don't have rights and yet think that their suffering morally matters, okay? So you could think that it's just bad for animals to feel pain and be tortured, right? Even if they don't have any rights. And you don't necessarily have to connect that to how it affects our character, right? So this is what Michael Knowles, and this is what Kant thinks, right? Like you shouldn't treat animals poorly because then it makes it more likely for you to treat other human beings poorly, right? You start torturing animals, and then what you're going to do is end up being a serial killer, okay? So that is not the only way to think about it. You could just think that the animal itself matters because the animal suffers. Now, if you don't like that, if you think that our treatment of animals only matters to the extent that it affects us, then I think you could still make some sort of argument to kind of fight against factory farming, right? Fight against animal mistreatment and animal cruelty, because you would think that a virtuous person should care about it, right? A virtuous person should care that factory farms mistreat animals, right? A virtuous person should care that there are better ways to do this. If your only thought is, all these pigs are going to the slaughter and there's going to be so much bacon that's yummy. If that's your only thought, then you're somehow missing something, right? Because a virtuous person may think, okay, yeah, animals do taste good. I mean, that's why I eat meat. But it's bad that they're treated so poorly. Okay, and that is something that should change. Lastly, Michael Knowles said that he's never encountered a good argument in favor of veganism, but I suspect that's because he just hasn't talked to philosophers about it. He should really talk to Peter Singer. Peter Singer is probably one of the most famous philosophers alive, and he's famous because he fights for animal rights, right? He wrote Animal Liberation, I think it was published in the 70s, and it was a very influential book. So if he wants to encounter good arguments in favor of veganism, he has to talk to somebody who knows the arguments, somebody like Peter Singer. All right, I'm going to end it here. I'll see you all next time.